a struggling waitress, fed his disabled daughter, and unknowingly won a millionaire's heart. Before we begin the story, leave a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss our latest stories. Enjoy the story. The rain was coming down in sheets that night in Asheville, North Carolina, casting a silver blur over the windshield as Ethan Grayson turned into the tiny parking lot beside a roadside diner that looked like it had been forgotten by time. A neon sign flickered weakly above the entrance. Maggie's, barely visible through the downpour. Ethan shut off the engine of his sleek black car, then reached into the back seat and unbuckled his daughter. Sophie didn't respond. She never did. Not anymore. She sat in her wheelchair, eyes fixed downward, arms motionless, except for the subtle tremble in her fingers. A child of 6, locked in silence and stillness since the accident that stole her mother, her mobility, and her voice. The child who used to sing along to birds in the morning now flinched at sound and barely acknowledged sunlight. Ethan carried her inside with the kind of gentle precision usually reserved for broken glass. The bell above the door jingled as they entered, the warmth and scent of fresh bread and rain-drenched wood welcoming them. The diner was nearly empty. A few tired travelers hunched over their coffee, a cook humming behind the counter, and one waitress wiping down tables. The place was far beneath Ethan's usual environment of marble floors and quiet string music. But tonight wasn't about business. Tonight was about the only thing he hadn't yet been able to fix. "Just the two of you?" the hostess asked, catching sight of Sophie's wheelchair and offering a hesitant smile. "Something quiet, if you can," Ethan replied. They were led to a booth in the far back, near a fogged-up window. As Ethan settled Sophie in, he tried not to think about how many specialists had failed to reach her, how many nights he'd sat across from her in silence, whispering stories into the void, just to feel like he hadn't lost everything. He stared at the menu, but didn't read a word. Then came the waitress. She approached with a notepad tucked into her apron and sleeves still dusted with flour. "Hi there, I'm Clara. I'll be taking care of you tonight." There was something in her tone, light, calm, completely unaffected by the fact that her customers clearly came from a very different world. Ethan looked up, startled by the steadiness in her gaze. She was young, mid-20s perhaps, with deep auburn hair pulled into a lazy braid and freckles dancing across her nose like little reminders of sunlit days. He cleared his throat. "Grilled chicken, and for her, soup, something soft." Clara glanced at Sophie and softened. "We've got homemade tomato bisque. Made it myself. I think she might like that." Ethan nodded and offered a small thank you, though he didn't believe Sophie would eat a bite. She hadn't in days. He had long stopped believing in breakthroughs. When Clara returned with the plates, she set the bowl carefully in front of Sophie and turned to Ethan. "Let me know if you need anything else." He murmured his thanks, picked up the spoon, and gently dipped it into the soup. "Sophie," he whispered, "just try one bite for me, okay?" He brought the spoon to her lips, and she turned her head. The motion was small, but the rejection was familiar, like a script written into her very bones. The spoon clattered against the side of the bowl and fell, splashing red droplets across the table and onto Ethan's cuff. A sharp inhale, a quiet murmur from a table nearby. Ethan's jaw clenched as he reached for the spoon again, steadying himself. And then she was there. Clara. May I? She asked softly. Ethan blinked. What? She nodded at the spoon. May I try? He hesitated. This wasn't a therapist. She had no credentials. She wasn't on anyone's payroll. But something in her face, not pity, not performance, made him pause. Wordlessly, he handed it to her. Clara didn't kneel, didn't force anything. She sat beside Sophie at eye level and began to talk, her voice like water over stones. You know, she said gently, when I was little, my grandmother told me that soup was like a cozy blanket for your tummy. Just one tiny sip, and it warms you up from the inside. Would you like to try a little warmth? Sophie didn't move, but her fingers, once rigid, shifted. A flicker. Clara dipped the spoon, lifted it slowly, and brought it to Sophie's lips. And this time, Sophie opened her mouth. She swallowed. It was one bite, one moment. But to Ethan, it was like watching the sunrise crack through years of storm. And then, God, she looked up at Clara, her gaze, clouded for so long, locked onto the waitress's face, and she smiled. Ethan felt something fracture inside him. Hope wasn't supposed to come this easily, not after everything. But there it was, fragile, trembling, and he was terrified to breathe in case it shattered. How did you do that? He asked, voice breaking. Clara looked up, her expression impossibly calm. I just talked to her. And just like that, something shifted that could never shift back. This wasn't just about soup. This was about a stranger, a broken man, a silent child, and something that felt dangerously close to a miracle. If this moment touched your heart, please subscribe to the channel and turn on the bell for more powerful, emotional stories. This is only the beginning, and trust me, you'll want to stay for the ending. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He sat in his study, lights dimmed, glass of untouched whiskey in hand, while the house around him echoed with silence. Sophie was asleep in her room, her breathing soft through the baby monitor he refused to stop using, even though she was 6 now. He replayed the moment again and again, the small shift in her fingers, the faint smile, the way her eyes had found Clara's face like it was a window to the world she had shut out. It hadn't just been a breakthrough. It had been something Ethan hadn't dared believe in for years. Connection. Real, tangible connection. And not with him, with Clara. That realization brought with it an unexpected rush of emotion. Not jealousy, exactly, but something close. A sharp sting that someone else had reached his daughter in ways he never could. He had built everything in his life from scratch. His company, his reputation, his empire. But this one fragile bridge between him and Sophie, it had been quietly built by a waitress with flour on her sleeves and no credentials. By morning, the whiskey still untouched, Ethan had made up his mind. He returned to the diner the next day, late in the afternoon. It was quieter now, just a handful of patrons sipping coffee and flipping through newspapers. Clara was there, tying her apron behind her back as she cleaned off a table near the window. Her hair was up this time, a pencil holding it in place, and a streak of pink chalk ran across her forearm from the specials board. She looked up and froze the moment she saw him. Mr. Grayson, she said, wiping her hands on her apron. Back so soon? Ethan didn't waste time. Do you have a moment? Clara glanced toward the kitchen. My shift ends in 10. Can it wait? I'll wait, he said simply. 10 minutes later, they were outside the diner, standing beneath a rustling maple tree, the wind tugging at Clara's braid. I wanted to thank you, Ethan began, voice measured but low. What you did for Sophie last night. There are no words for that. I've hired therapists from all over the country, the best, and none of them have ever reached her. Clara shifted slightly, her eyes cautious. I wasn't trying to reach her. I just treated her like a person, like she mattered. She does matter. I know, Clara said, but sometimes people forget that children, especially those like Sophie, don't want to be studied or fixed. They want to be seen. Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Come work for me. Clara blinked. Excuse me? I want to hire you as Sophie's full-time caregiver, companion, whatever title makes you most comfortable. She responded to you. That means something. Clara let out a dry laugh. You're offering me a job because I fed a child a spoonful of soup? I'm offering you a job because you're the only person in 3 years who made my daughter smile. Silence stretched between them. Clara's face was unreadable, but something flickered in her eyes. Not surprise, not pride, something more fragile. Fear. I'm not a therapist, she said after a moment. I didn't go to school for this. I don't have letters after my name. I don't care about credentials, Ethan said. I care about what works. She looked away, then back at him, jaw tightening. You don't know me. You don't know why I'm here or what I've walked away from. You think this is a story with a neat beginning and end, but it's not, and I'm not some miracle worker. Ethan held her gaze. No. You're someone who saw my daughter. That's more than anyone else has done. Clara stepped back. I can't. Why? Her lips parted, but no words came. Then she shook her head. I just can't. Ethan watched her walk away, her shoulders slightly hunched, as if she were bracing herself against more than just the chill of the wind. He didn't understand her answer, but one thing was clear. This woman was running from something. And if his instincts were right, whatever it was had broken her long before she ever walked into that diner. But she had touched something in Sophie. And if Ethan was honest with himself, she had stirred something in him too. Not just hope, possibility. Ethan Grayson wasn't a man who let unanswered questions linger. It went against every instinct he had built his life upon. If something didn't make sense, he studied it. If someone said no, he found out why. And Clara Hayes, waitress, stranger, mystery, was a question that refused to leave his mind. He didn't believe in accidents. People didn't just walk into your life and change everything by coincidence. There was something behind Clara's eyes that night in the diner. Something tender, but guarded. She hadn't just spoken kindly to Sophie. She had spoken from a place of deep knowing. Ethan had seen it, felt it. So he did what he did best. He started asking questions. It didn't take long. With his resources, Clara's past came into focus, like an old photograph slowly developing. She had been a standout student at a university in Vermont, studying pediatric therapy with an emphasis on communicative disorders. Professors praised her compassion, her rare emotional intelligence, her ability to connect with children others had written off. One advisor had written in a recommendation letter, Clara Hayes doesn't teach children how to speak. She teaches them how to be heard. And then 2 years ago, nothing. No graduation. No job placements. She had vanished. Ethan leaned back in his chair, a printout of her file in his hands. The final clue came from a small obituary buried deep in a local paper. The photo of a boy stared up at him. Round cheeks, a shy smile, and eyes too wise for his age. Liam Hayes, age 9. The obituary didn't offer much. No details, no causes, just his name, his age, and a short line about being beloved by his sister Clara. That was enough. Ethan didn't sleep that night. He sat in the dark by Sophie's room, watching her chest rise and fall with each slow breath. And for the first time since her mother passed, he felt something that he couldn't rationalize or control: empathy. Clara hadn't just connected with Sophie out of kindness. She had lived it. She had known love and loss in ways Ethan was only beginning to understand. The next evening, he went back to the diner. This time, he didn't come with a pitch or a proposition. He came with the truth. Clara was wiping down the counter, her movements slower than usual. She looked up, startled when she saw him walk through the door again. "Mr. Grayson," she said, voice wary. "I thought I made myself clear." "You did," Ethan said gently. "But I didn't come to offer you a job. I came to say I'm sorry." Clara's brow furrowed. "For what?" "For pushing. For not seeing that you're more than someone I want to hire. For forgetting that pain doesn't need an audience to be real." She looked down, her fingers tightening around the edge of the rag in her hand. "I know about Liam," Ethan said quietly. Clara froze. "I found the obituary. I'm sorry for your loss." She didn't speak for a long time. When she finally did, her voice was so soft he almost missed it. "He was everything. My parents weren't around. I raised him, bathed him, learned sign language for him, memorized every one of his medications. I thought, if I knew enough, if I loved him enough, I could keep him safe." Her throat worked as she tried to hold back the flood behind her eyes. "But one night he got a cold, just a cold, and I thought I had time. I thought if I let him rest, he'd be better by morning. But he wasn't. He went into respiratory distress, and by the time I called 911, it was too late." Ethan didn't move, didn't speak. He just let the words settle in the space between them like sacred things. "I was supposed to protect him," she whispered, "and I didn't. I failed him." "No," Ethan said. "You loved him. That's not failure." Clara looked up then, and her eyes were filled with a pain Ethan recognized. The kind that didn't just sit in your chest, but shaped your every breath. It was the same grief he carried every time he saw Sophie struggle to speak. Every time he remembered the last thing his wife said before she was taken by a drunk driver. "I can't do it again," Clara said, shaking her head. "I can't let myself care and then lose it all." "I'm not asking you to fix Sophie," Ethan replied, voice steady. "And I'm not asking you to fix yourself. I saw the way she looked at you, Clara, and I think you saw it too." Tears slipped down Clara's cheek, but she didn't wipe them away. "Just 1 week," Ethan said. "No promises, no pressure. Just a chance to see if maybe, just maybe, Sophie isn't the only one who deserves another chance." Clara didn't answer, but she didn't say no either. And that was enough. For now, Clara didn't expect the house to look the way it did. She had imagined cold marble, sleek angles, and the echo of footsteps in halls too wide for comfort. Something that screamed wealth and distance. But when she stepped into the Grayson estate that Monday morning, what struck her wasn't the grandeur. It was the quiet. The silence wasn't peaceful. It was heavy, filled with all the things that hadn't been said, hadn't been healed. The foyer was polished, the light filtering through tall windows casting patterns on the hardwood floor. Everything was beautiful, impeccable, but nothing felt lived in. Ethan led her down a hallway, his pace slower than usual. He glanced at her a few times, like he wasn't sure whether to speak. Clara appreciated the silence. It gave her space to breathe, to gather what courage she had left. At the end of the hall, he stopped at a door, half open. "This is Sophie's room," he said softly. Clara stepped inside, and immediately her breath caught. The room was warm. Pastel colors, soft bedding, and shelves lined with plush animals and well-worn books. A painting of sunflowers, clearly done by a child's hand, hung crookedly above a reading nook. It felt like a place meant to be loved in. Sophie sat in her wheelchair by the window, her gaze distant, as if the world outside the glass was easier to face than anything inside. She didn't turn at the sound of their footsteps. She didn't react at all. Ethan knelt beside his daughter and gently brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Sweetheart," he murmured, "this is Miss Clara. She's going to spend some time with us." No response. Clara stepped forward slowly, crouching to Sophie's level, careful not to intrude. "Hi, Sophie," she said softly. "I like your sunflowers. They remind me of a garden my brother used to take me to." Still, nothing, not even a flicker. Clara didn't press. She knew better than to force a connection. She stood and turned to Ethan. "I'll need a little space with her, just for a few minutes." Ethan hesitated, then nodded. "I'll be down the hall." When he left, Clara walked to the window and sat on the floor near Sophie. Not across from her, not confronting, just near. She pulled a small notebook from her bag and began to sketch. Nothing elaborate, just a loose outline of a flower, its petals stretching in the sunlight. "I know you don't know me," Clara said, her voice gentle. "And that's okay. I'm not going to ask you to talk, or to smile, or even look at me." She drew another flower. "I just wanted to be near you, because sometimes, even when we don't want company, it's nice to know someone's there." Still no response, but Clara didn't mind. The stillness wasn't rejection. It was a boundary, and boundaries were sacred. After 10 minutes, Clara stood. She left the sketchbook on the windowsill, the page open to the flowers. "I'll be back tomorrow," she said simply. Then she left. Ethan was waiting in the hall, his arms crossed, his expression unreadable. "How'd it go?" Clara gave a small smile. "She didn't throw anything at me. That's a win." He huffed a laugh, surprised. "You really think this is going to work?" Clara shrugged. "I don't know. But I think she's listening, even if it doesn't look like it." For the rest of the week, Clara came back. She didn't try to teach, or guide, or fix. She simply shared space. Some days, she brought small puzzles and did them alone near Sophie. Other days, she read stories out loud, even when Sophie didn't appear to listen. Once, she sang softly under her breath, a lullaby she hadn't dared hum in years. And then, on the 5th day, something changed. Clara was halfway through reading a book about animals when she paused. "I wonder which one's your favorite," she said to no one in particular. "I've always liked elephants. Gentle, but fierce when they need to be." There was silence. Then, a soft, almost imperceptible sound. A breath caught, a tiny, near-silent hum. Clara looked up, and for the first time, Sophie's eyes were on her. Not past her, not through her, on her. They held each other's gaze for a long time. And then, Sophie blinked once, slowly, intentionally. A yes. Clara's throat tightened. "Elephants it is," she whispered. Down the hall, Ethan stood behind the door, having heard every word. His hands trembled slightly, and for the first time in what felt like years, he let himself hope. Ethan wasn't sure when the air in the house had started to feel different. Maybe it was the first time Sophie turned her head ever so slightly when Clara spoke. Or maybe it was the quiet hum of Clara's voice that now floated through the halls every afternoon, a sound that didn't feel like intrusion, but invitation. Sophie still didn't talk. She didn't smile. But she was present in ways Ethan hadn't seen in years. There was a subtle shift in her posture, the way her eyes would track Clara's movements, how her fingers tapped along to the rhythm of Clara's storytelling. It wasn't much, but to Ethan, it was everything. One Thursday afternoon, Clara arrived with something new, a small keyboard with slightly worn keys. She didn't explain it, didn't make a fuss. She just placed it near the window where Sophie usually sat, plugged it in, and gently pressed a key. A soft note rang out, tentative and clear. "I used to play," Clara said softly, half to herself. "Badly, but my brother loved it. He said the wrong notes were just a part of the song." Sophie didn't react immediately. Clara didn't expect her to. She sat beside the keyboard and began to play a lullaby, slow, halting, but full of intention. The melody wove its way into the room, curling around the silence like a warm breeze. Ethan stood in the hallway, unnoticed. He didn't dare interrupt. When Clara finished, she looked at Sophie and smiled. "If you ever want to try, I'll show you how." Then she left the keyboard there and moved to the other side of the room with a book. She didn't mention it again. Not the next day, not the one after, but on Sunday, something happened. Ethan found Clara in the kitchen, making tea. She touched it, he said quietly, like he still didn't believe it. Clara looked up, confused. "Touched what?" "The keyboard. Just one note." She pressed it, and then looked around, like she wasn't sure if it was allowed. Then she did it again. Clara's heart skipped. Did she smile? "No," Ethan said, but then added, "But she didn't flinch either." The small victories were becoming more frequent. Ethan started spending more time in the room when Clara was with Sophie. At first, it was unspoken. He'd linger near the door, then slowly make his way inside. Settling in the chair by the bookshelf, Clara always welcomed him without words, just a smile. And Sophie, she didn't retreat. She allowed it. One evening, after Sophie had fallen asleep in her wheelchair near the window, Clara and Ethan sat in the garden. The night was warm, stars faintly scattered across the sky. "She's healing," Ethan said, his voice hushed. Clara looked at him. "So are you." He chuckled, but it wasn't mocking. "That obvious?" "I see the way you look at her now. It's not just fear anymore." "It used to be guilt," Ethan admitted, eyes fixed on the shadows of the trees. "Like I failed her, like I failed my wife." Clara said nothing for a long moment, just listened. "I thought money would fix things," he continued. "I threw it at doctors, therapists, specialists. I built this entire house to feel safe, but none of it mattered." "It's not about what you give," Clara said gently. "It's about how you stay." Ethan turned to her. "You stayed." She smiled softly, but there was pain behind it. "I've been trying to learn how to." He studied her for a long moment, then asked the question he hadn't dared before. "What happened to him? Your brother?" Clara looked down at her hands, clasped tightly in her lap. The silence stretched before she answered. Leukemia. He was 8. I was 12. We spent a year in and out of hospitals. I used to read to him every night, just like I do with Sophie now. Ethan's voice was quiet. I'm sorry. I ran from it all after he died. Teaching, caregiving, even music. It all reminded me of what I lost. But you're here, he said softly. I'm trying to be. The vulnerability in her voice was raw, and Ethan felt it in his chest like a pulse. I don't know what this is between us, he said honestly, but I know I don't want to lose it. Clara looked up at him, surprised. I'm not asking for anything, Ethan continued. Not now. I just wanted you to know that, having you here, it's more than just for Sophie. Her eyes met his, and for a moment, there was something unspoken between them. Not romance, not yet, but possibility, a beginning. And for two people who had only known endings, that was more than enough. The rain had started to fall in soft, steady sheets, misting the wide windows of the Carter estate, as if the sky, too, was processing something heavy. Clara sat beside the piano in Sophie's room, her fingers gliding across the keys in slow, simple chords. Sophie was curled in her chair with a blanket over her knees, her eyes trained, not on Clara, but not away from her either. It was a kind of gaze Clara had learned to treasure. Quiet, observant, present. That morning had begun like any other, with Clara arriving at the estate early. But something felt different. The house didn't feel like a place she visited. It felt like a place she returned to. Ethan had greeted her at the door with 2 mugs of coffee. It was a small gesture, but Clara noticed the extra sugar in hers, just how she liked it. Long night? He asked as they stepped into the foyer. Clara nodded, accepting the cup. Barely slept. Same. He didn't elaborate. He didn't have to. They were both carrying ghosts that didn't always wait until nightfall to whisper. Later that afternoon, as Sophie sat by the window and Clara played softly behind her, Ethan leaned in the doorway. His gaze didn't linger on Clara like it once did. It settled on Sophie. On the way, she tilted her head slightly when a familiar note rang out. How she shifted her hands when the melody turned. You see it, don't you? Clara asked gently. Ethan nodded, his voice thick. She's listening. The doorbell rang not long after. Clara offered to answer it while Ethan stayed with Sophie. At the front door stood an unfamiliar woman, tall, sleek, her presence confident. She wore a business suit, her lips painted in perfect red. I'm Miranda Knox, the woman said with a cool smile. I'm here for Mr. Carter. Clara blinked. He's inside, but... Miranda stepped past her, not waiting for an invitation. Ethan looked up in surprise as Miranda strode into the room. Miranda? He said, clearly startled. Hello, Ethan, she said smoothly, placing her bag down. We have a lot to talk about. Clara stood awkwardly by the doorway. Ethan caught her eye and gave a small, apologetic glance. I wasn't expecting company, he told Miranda. I came early. Couldn't stay away, Miranda said, eyeing Clara now. And you must be the help? The word hit like a slap. Clara forced a polite smile and excused herself, walking down the hall to the kitchen, where she set her coffee down a little too hard. Help. She had never cared much for titles, but somehow the dismissal cut deeper than expected. Back in the sitting room, Miranda was all silk and suggestion, her voice lowering, her posture relaxing like she belonged there. Clara watched from the hallway as Ethan listened, polite but restrained. She couldn't hear every word, but she saw enough. The way Miranda leaned in too close. The way Ethan stiffened when she touched his arm. Clara retreated. Later, when Miranda finally left with a promise to check in soon, Ethan found Clara by the piano again. She didn't stop playing when he entered. "She's from your world," Clara said softly, her eyes on the keys. Ethan sighed. "She's from my past." Clara looked up then. "Is she your future?" The question wasn't accusatory. It was honest. Vulnerable. "No," Ethan said immediately, then more quietly. "She doesn't know me now. Not the me I'm trying to become." Clara searched his face, looking for cracks in the sincerity. She found none. "I didn't like how she spoke to you," Ethan added. "She didn't speak to me," Clara corrected gently. "She spoke past me." Ethan stepped closer. "You're not the help, Clara." She smiled, but it was sad. "Sometimes that's all people will see." "Well, not me, not Sophie, and not anyone who matters." They stood in silence for a moment, the room still except for the distant sound of rain tapping against the glass. Then Ethan said something unexpected. "Stay for dinner." Clara blinked. "What?" "Tonight, with us. No agenda, no therapy, just stay." Clara hesitated. For a moment, every reason to say no flooded her mind. But then she looked down the hallway toward Sophie's room. She thought of the soft way the little girl had rested her head on Clara's shoulder during music time, of how she had once trembled at every touch, and now leaned into it. "I'd love to," Clara said softly. Dinner that night wasn't perfect. Sophie didn't eat much. Ethan burned the rice. Clara accidentally knocked over a glass, but they laughed. They passed plates and shared stories, and at one point, Clara caught Sophie staring at both of them, and smiling. It wasn't wide. It wasn't long. But it was real. Ethan saw it too. He reached across the table, his fingers grazing Clara's, and whispered, "She's coming back to us." Clara smiled. "Maybe we all are." The next morning broke with a softness that seemed almost fragile, like the world had taken a breath overnight and hadn't yet decided whether to sigh or sing. Clara arrived earlier than usual. She wasn't sure why. Maybe it was instinct. Or maybe it was the way Ethan's eyes had lingered on her the night before, as though he was searching for something he hadn't realized he needed. She stepped inside quietly, the warmth of the house greeting her like memory. Sophie's giggles floated from the garden, and for a second Clara paused, stunned. Laughter. Light, fluttering, unmistakable laughter. It had been so rare, so precious, that hearing it now felt like stepping into a miracle. Outside, Sophie sat in her wheelchair near the flower beds, a bubble wand in her hand. Ethan knelt beside her, showing her how to dip and blow. The bubbles caught the sunlight as they rose, shimmering with streaks of color, delicate and unpromised. Clara didn't say a word. She just watched, clutching the moment like something sacred. When Ethan noticed her, his expression softened. "She asked for you," he said. Clara stepped forward, eyes locked on Sophie. "She asked?" "She pointed to your picture on the fridge and tapped her hand twice," he said. "It's her way of saying she misses someone." Clara knelt slowly beside them, careful not to break the spell. Sophie's eyes lit up at her presence, her smile small but full. Clara reached out, letting her fingers gently curl around Sophie's, "Hey, sweetheart," Clara whispered. "Missed me?" Sophie nodded once, the motion shy but certain. Ethan stepped back, watching them with a quiet awe that only a father learning to hope again could feel. Later that day, Clara suggested they try something new. "I want to teach her music," she said. "Not just listen. I want her to play." Ethan looked uncertain. "She's never shown interest before. And her motor skills—" "I know," Clara said, "but music doesn't care how you move. It just wants you to feel." He didn't argue. He just trusted her. They set up a small electric keyboard in the sunroom. Clara adjusted the height so Sophie could reach it from her chair. At first, the little girl only stared at the keys, her hands hesitant, her fingers curling and uncurling with uncertainty. Clara sat beside her. "Close your eyes," she said. "Pretend the keys are water. Just touch them. Don't worry what comes out." Sophie hesitated, then slowly let her fingers fall. A soft note rang out, then another, discordant, awkward, but beautiful. "You hear that?" Clara whispered. "That's yours. That's your sound." Sophie's lips twitched upward. From then on, they played every afternoon, sometimes for 5 minutes, sometimes for an hour. Some days the notes were scattered and shy. Other days they came in full, surprising phrases that made Clara's heart ache. Ethan often watched from the doorway, his phone forgotten, his world shrinking to the sound of his daughter learning how to speak again, without words. That week, Clara also began noticing subtle shifts in Ethan. The businessman was still there, the man who measured time in contracts and currencies. But beside Sophie, with Clara near, he was changing. He asked questions, not about numbers, but about feelings. He lingered at the table after dinner. He told stories about his childhood, about his late wife, about fears he'd never said aloud. One evening, as Clara washed dishes and Ethan dried, their hands brushed and stayed. He looked at her, something flickering in his eyes. "You make this place feel like home," he said softly. Clara smiled. "It already was. You just forgot how to live in it." That night, as she prepared to leave, Sophie reached out and tugged gently at Clara's sleeve. Clara knelt beside her. "What is it, sweetheart?" Sophie touched her chest, then pointed to Clara's heart, a gesture. Clara blinked back the tears. "I love you too." When she turned to Ethan, he wasn't just smiling. He was seeing, truly seeing, not just Clara the caregiver, Clara the woman, the heart that had brought his daughter back to life, and his own. As Clara stepped out into the cool night air, she looked up at the sky, stars scattered like wishes across velvet. For the first time in years, she didn't feel like she was running from something. She was walking toward it. The sun had just begun to set behind the hills of Napa Valley, painting the sky in hues of peach and lavender. When Ethan found himself standing alone in the kitchen, staring at the dinner he'd made but barely touched. The house was quieter than usual. Sophie had gone to bed early, her body tired from a day filled with music and movement and laughter. But Ethan's thoughts were elsewhere, stuck in the space between gratitude and fear. He glanced at the clock, debating whether to call Clara, not because anything was wrong, quite the opposite. Everything felt right, too right, and that was what scared him. After so many years of guarded smiles and empty evenings, the sudden presence of warmth in his home unsettled him. Not because he didn't want it, but because he was terrified it might disappear. When he finally picked up his phone, he didn't text. He drove. Clara was still awake when she heard the knock. Her small cottage near Yuntville had always been a sanctuary. Quiet, modest, safe. She opened the door, expecting the wind, but it was Ethan. His eyes were tired, but kind. His hands fidgeted at his sides, like a man unsure of what he was supposed to say next. "I didn't mean to show up like this," he said softly. Clara stepped aside. "Then don't apologize. Come in." He entered slowly, like the walls might reject him. Clara motioned for him to sit on the worn couch near the fireplace, then poured 2 cups of tea. When she handed him one, their fingers touched and lingered. "I keep wondering," Ethan began, staring into the steam, "if this is real." Clara sat beside him, her posture gentle but upright. "It's as real as we let it be." Ethan nodded, still hesitant. "I've been walking through life with walls around me. Sophie was the only person who could reach in. And even with her, it wasn't enough. Not until you." Clara didn't speak, but her hand found his, and the silence between them grew warm. "I keep thinking," he continued, "what if I mess this up? What if I hurt her again? What if I hurt you?" "You will," Clara said, not unkindly. "We all do eventually. But that's not the question. The question is, will you show up after the hurt? Will you stay?" Ethan turned to her, his eyes searching. "I want to." Clara smiled faintly. "Then that's where we begin." That night, under the soft glow of lamplight, Ethan rested his head against the back of the couch, Clara beside him. No promises, no confessions, just presence. For both of them, it was more intimate than anything else they'd known in a long time. The next morning, Clara returned to the Carter home with a new sense of peace. Sophie met her at the door, arms wide, her smile waiting. Clara scooped her into an embrace, burying her face in the girl's soft curls. "I missed you," Sophie signed, clumsily, her fingers still learning. Clara's heart soared. "I missed you more." As the day unfolded, Ethan watched the two of them. The way Clara coaxed Sophie into laughter with silly faces during piano practice. The way she let Sophie paint her nails with every color in the box. The way Sophie's giggle became a soundtrack to their home. But it was after lunch, while they were in the garden, that something shifted again. Sophie was trying to walk across the stone path, short steps between the flower beds, when she stumbled. Ethan moved to catch her, but Clara held up a hand. "Wait." Sophie sat on the ground, her expression uncertain, caught between frustration and embarrassment. Clara knelt beside her. "It's okay to fall," she said softly. "It's how we learn where our strength lives." Sophie's eyes welled, but she didn't cry. Instead, she looked to her father. "Help me up?" she asked, her voice quiet. Ethan reached out, tears already forming in his eyes. As he lifted her gently to her feet, Sophie smiled up at him. "I did it." "You did," he whispered, holding her close. That evening, they sat in the backyard watching the fireflies come out. Clara leaned her head on Ethan's shoulder. Sophie lay on a blanket nearby, watching the stars. "I never thought I'd have this again," Ethan said quietly. "You didn't have to," Clara replied. "It found you anyway." And in that stillness, as night fell around them and hearts began to stitch themselves whole, it became clear. They weren't just healing, they were becoming a family. The seasons began to shift, and with them, something within Sophie changed too. The girl who once recoiled from touch, who lived in a quiet shell of her own, was now beginning to bloom. Ethan saw it in the way she held Clara's hand a little longer at the end of the day. He heard it in the soft humming she made while painting by the kitchen window. The same tune Clara used to sing under her breath when cooking. Sophie was remembering. Not just pain, but joy. One rainy morning, Ethan stood in the hallway outside Sophie's room, listening to the sound of Clara's voice. She was reading aloud from a book about a brave girl who built her own wings when she couldn't walk. Sophie was curled beneath a blanket, her eyes locked on Clara's face, absorbing every word like sunlight. Clara paused mid-sentence. "Do you think the girl in the story was afraid?" Sophie nodded slowly. "Me too," Clara said softly. "But she didn't stop, did she?" "No," Sophie whispered. "She tried anyway." Ethan couldn't move. His daughter's voice, it was stronger now, not just audible, but purposeful. Every syllable was a rebellion against silence. He blinked back tears and turned away, letting them have the moment. Later that day, Ethan asked Clara to join him for coffee on the porch. It was early afternoon, and the rain had softened to a drizzle. The hills were cloaked in mist, the air thick with petrichor. Clara wrapped her hands around the mug Ethan handed her. "She's different lately," he said, voice low, eyes on the distant vineyard rows. "She's becoming herself," Clara replied. "She always was in there. She just needed someone who believed." "I used to think money could fix everything," Ethan admitted. "Therapists, specialists, state-of-the-art technology, but none of it gave her what you did." Clara looked down, unsure how to hold the weight of that praise. "I don't want to make this harder," Ethan said gently, "but I need to ask, what happens when the 3 months are up?" The air stilled. Clara had been avoiding the thought, pushing it away like a box left in the attic, collecting dust. She took a breath. "I don't know." "You could stay," Ethan offered, almost too quietly. "Not just for Sophie, but for me." Clara's hands trembled slightly, and not from the cold. "I don't want to run anymore," she confessed. "But I'm scared." "Of what?" "Of belonging," she said. "Of being happy and losing it again." Ethan set his cup down. "I'm scared too. But what if we stopped preparing for the worst and just lived the good?" She didn't answer, not with words. But she reached across the space between them and took his hand. That night, Sophie had a nightmare. Clara woke to the sound of soft cries down the hall and rushed to her room. Ethan was already there, sitting on the edge of the bed, stroking Sophie's hair. The little girl was trembling, her eyes wide with fear. "She thought you left," Ethan explained, his voice raw. "She was calling for you." Clara sat beside them and gently took Sophie into her arms. "I'm here," she whispered. "I'm not going anywhere." Sophie clung to her like a lifeline. "I missed you," she sobbed. "I missed you too, sweetheart. I'm here." Ethan watched them both, his heart folding in on itself. He had never seen Sophie reach for someone like this, not even him. And instead of feeling jealousy, he felt something else: relief, gratitude, awe. Clara looked up at him over Sophie's shoulder, and in that gaze, he saw everything he hadn't dared to hope for. The next day, Clara sat at the piano with Sophie, guiding her small hands through the opening notes of a lullaby. Ethan stood at the doorway, silent. As Sophie pressed each key, hesitantly, but with intent, Clara whispered the words of the song softly beside her. "You are my sunshine, my only sunshine. Sophie repeated it after her, voice small but sure. I make you happy when skies are gray. Ethan's chest swelled, not just with love, but with the realization that this fragile growing thing between them wasn't just healing, it was transforming. And they weren't just surviving anymore. They were becoming something brave, something real, something like home. Spring arrived gently in Napa Valley, painting the hills in soft greens and wildflowers. The vineyard just beyond the Carter estate was coming alive, rows of vines stretching beneath a pale blue sky, the scent of new beginnings riding every breeze. For the first time in years, Ethan Carter felt like he was no longer standing still in his life, but walking forward, step by step, not alone. Clara had decided to stay. It wasn't announced with fanfare or declarations. It was as simple as an extra toothbrush in the bathroom, a denim jacket draped over the kitchen chair, her shoes beside the door next to Ethan's and Sophie's. It was presence, steady, warm, and unspoken. One morning, Sophie came into the kitchen while Ethan and Clara were preparing breakfast together. She wheeled herself in quietly, watched them for a long beat, then said softly, "Can we all eat together?" Clara blinked, stunned. Ethan dropped the spatula in his hand. Sophie hadn't initiated anything like that since before the accident. "Of course," Clara said, moving quickly to her side. "You want to help set the table?" Sophie nodded. "Can I fold the napkins?" "You fold them better than me." Ethan grinned. The three of them moved like a unit, awkward at times, imperfect but beautifully whole. Sophie folded the napkins with careful fingers. Clara poured juice, and Ethan burned the toast, to everyone's amusement. Laughter came freely. So did the silences. The good kind. The kind that holds space, not distance. Later that day, Clara took Sophie outside to the garden. The breeze was light, rustling through the leaves of the sycamore trees. Clara had started a small patch for herbs and flowers with Sophie, who loved naming the plants. Today, they were planting sunflowers, Clara's favorite. "You know," Clara said as they patted the soil around a new sprout, "sunflowers follow the light. Even when it's cloudy, they keep turning toward the sun." "Like you?" Sophie asked innocently. Clara froze. Sophie looked up at her. "You're not scared anymore, are you?" Clara smiled softly. "Sometimes I am, but not enough to run." That evening, Ethan took them both to the old vineyard barn, which had been cleaned out and strung with soft hanging lights. There was no party, no reason, just a moment he wanted to make memorable. A record player sat in the corner, spinning something slow and sweet. He reached for Clara's hand. "Dance with me." "I'm not much of a dancer," she said, teasing. "You don't have to be. Just stand still. I'll do the rest." They danced slowly, her head against his chest. Sophie, watching from her chair and clapping along. Halfway through the song, Clara broke the moment with a laugh. "What is it?" Ethan asked. "I've never been this happy and this terrified at the same time." "Good," he said, touching her cheek. "That's how you know it's real." The next morning, Sophie asked to visit her mother's grave. It wasn't something Ethan had expected. For years, he had visited alone, sometimes with tears, sometimes with silence. But now, as they stood beneath the old oak tree in the corner of the cemetery, Clara holding one of Sophie's hands, Ethan the other, something felt right. Sophie placed a bouquet of fresh-picked sunflowers at the base of the stone. I miss you, she whispered, but it's okay now. She looked at Clara and added, We're okay now. Ethan's throat tightened. Clara's hand gripped his more firmly. They stayed there a while, just breathing. Weeks passed, then months. Clara returned to school part-time, this time with Ethan's full support. She began writing again, children's books inspired by Sophie, who loved hearing her stories before bed. Ethan began closing his laptop earlier, walking barefoot through the house with Sophie in tow, often finding Clara in the garden, her hands in the soil, her hair caught in the sun. One evening, as the three of them sat on the porch swing, watching the stars blink into the sky, Ethan took a small box from his pocket. Clara turned to him, heart skipping. I've done a lot of things in my life, he said, but nothing braver than loving you, and nothing more right than building this life with you and Sophie. Clara's eyes filled with tears. He opened the box. A simple ring. A quiet promise. Stay, not just here, but with us. Always. Clara nodded, voice trembling. Yes, always. Sophie leaned into them, her arms wrapping around both of their waists. And just like that, the last missing piece of the family they didn't know they were building fell into place. Not perfectly, not without scars, but with love strong enough to hold all the brokenness and still call it beautiful. Sometimes, the most extraordinary stories don't start with fireworks. They begin with quiet moments. A tired waitress kneeling beside a silent child. A wealthy single father drowning in guilt, but still hoping for something better. And a little girl in a wheelchair who had forgotten how to smile until someone saw her, not as broken, but as whole. Ethan Carter had built an empire, but he couldn't rebuild his daughter's spirit until Clara walked into their lives. Clara, haunted by her own past, didn't expect to become anyone's miracle. But love has a way of finding us when we least expect it, often through the very wounds we're trying to hide. Together, they formed something rare and real. Not a perfect family, but a family nonetheless. Their journey was not about grand gestures, but small victories. A spoonful of soup, a bedtime story, a soft smile, a hand held in the dark. Through these moments, trust was rebuilt. Fear gave way to courage, and healing became not only possible, but inevitable. Clara learned to believe in herself again, not because someone fixed her, but because someone gave her space to try. Ethan let down his armor and showed his heart, not as a businessman, but as a father and a man willing to love again. And Sophie, the little girl once locked inside her silence, bloomed into the bright, curious spirit she had always been, because someone chose to reach her with kindness, not pity. This story reminds us that healing doesn't happen in isolation. It happens in connection, in the risk of reaching out, in the grace of being seen. Love isn't about saving someone. It's about staying when it's hard, choosing someone not just once, but every single day. The lesson? Sometimes the people who seem the most guarded, the most wounded, are the ones who carry the most to give, if only someone will be patient enough to see past their walls. We all carry regrets, grief, and fears. But those things don't define us. What defines us is what we choose to do with the pain, build walls, or build bridges. So here's a question for you. Have you ever met someone who changed your life just by seeing the best in you, even when you couldn't see it in yourself? We'd love to hear your thoughts. Share your story or your perspective in the comments below. Let's create a space where others can be inspired by your voice and experience. And if this story touched your heart, if you believe in second chances, quiet strength, and the healing power of love, don't forget to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us keep bringing you powerful, soul-stirring stories like this one. Until next time, remember, love doesn't always show up the way we expect, but it always shows up when we're ready to receive it. Keep your heart open. You never know who's about to walk into your life and change it forever.